The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Last week, the Treasury Department released a report saying that the government ran a deficit of $98 billion in the month of July, and this is, of course, not exactly breaking news. We've been running deficits in months, probably for years, probably decades. I don't know, I didn't look at all the facts and figures. But in any event, it was $98 billion in July. And yet, in that same report, the overall federal debt for the United States remained the same all through the month of July. The figure that it was stuck on was $16.699 trillion. That's the national debt, or the federal debt that the United States is running right now. Now, it just so happens that that 16.699 figure is the debt ceiling. That's the amount that the United States can borrow without actually breaking the law. If they exceed that number, they break the law. And in fact, we reached the debt ceiling back in May the 17th. So that's about 3 months ago. May the 17th, we reached that limit, and yet miraculously, according to the reports put out by the Treasury Department, the overall debt didn't go up. This is a quote from CNS News. They put out a note, I think back in May, when they reached the ceiling. The head of the Treasury sent a note over to the Congress and said that, you know, we've reached our limit. We're going to do the extraordinary measures that are needed to keep everything constant for the months ahead so that you have some time to deal with the debt ceiling crisis when you get back from your summer recess. And right now Congress is on recess and so on. So what are these extraordinary measures that they take to make sure that the figure is stuck on a figure that's just below the ceiling? This is in CNS News from August 14th. It says, if Treasury's daily statements were to declare that the government had borrowed an additional net $98 billion to cover the $98 billion deficit the Treasury declared in its monthly statement for July, the Treasury would be conceding that the government had already surpassed the legal limit on the debt and has been violating the law by continuing to borrow additional money. It says, instead, even as the Treasury was running up the $98 billion deficit, it reported in the July monthly Treasury statement, every one of the 22 daily Treasury statements published for July said that the Treasury had closed out the previous business day with exactly that 16.699 figure. And so basically what happens, they do a few tricks and cover some things up over here, shift some things over here, and then just, as it says there, for the same, 22 days, it actually is more like 90 days when you add all 3 months up, they've had that same overall figure. It's basically like the people in charge of writing the checkbooks or the checks, they have the checkbook register and they get to a point where they reach their limit and they just stop declaring that they've written any more checks, even though they continue to do so. They just say that they're not raising the debt when in fact they are. That's how they, I guess, avoid breaking the law, at least on paper. But technically, they've broken the law. They've exceeded their limit. And this sort of thing happens routinely. Anymore, I mean, you see politicians, and so many of them are lawyers, and lawyers are quite skilled, not in executing the law, but in getting around the laws of the land. You look at several other examples. Consider the way the Obama administration is enforcing Obamacare, the nationalized health care plan that was approved or passed in Congress a few years ago. Of course, when that happened, the American people really didn't have much say at all in that legislation. But nevertheless, Congress did, in fact, empower the Obama administration, with the power it needed to create this national health care system. And it's been quite, there's been quite a lot about that in the news just in recent weeks. Now, this new law, or the things associated with this new law, were basically supposed to be rolled in this year, 2013, and next year. But what's interesting here with respect to the dates is that next year there's the midterm elections, when a lot of the members of Congress are up for re-election. And right now in the House, the Republicans have more seats, and so the Democrats really want to win more seats if they can, so as to give the administration just total control in Washington. And so in order to win more seats next year, the administration has decided not to enforce, they've decided not to enforce the laws associated with Obamacare until after the elections. Why? Why would they do this? Why would they want to do this? Well, if they enforce the laws now, as many people are reporting, even CNN, even some of the more liberal organizations, if they enforce those laws now, it would crush small businesses with more fees associated with health care, as they would have to put in place all these massive, massive expenditures to keep health care alive and well for their employees. And in order to survive, a lot of these businesses would have to lay off people, or they'd have to reduce their hours back to 29 hours per week, because once you reach the 30-hour threshold, then they have to be given health care. It's just crazy, all these things that they're trying to do just to survive. And so to prevent these companies from going under or from having to lay off people, the administration has decided basically not to enforce the laws that have been passed, that have been legislated. I'm not saying they're good laws, they're not, but they have been passed. And here again, you have an administration that's decided to enforce the law later when it's more expedient politically. Now, you've probably also heard about the many health care exemptions that the administration is giving out to Congress or to some of their allies in organized labor. This is not written within the law. In other words, it's illegal to provide the perks or the favors for your friends in Washington or for your friends in organized labor. But the administration has nevertheless done that because they know how much of a burden financially nationalized health care is going to be. Nothing's for free. See, some people in America seem to think that, well, Obamacare is going to make it possible for people to have free health care, and it's not free. Somebody pays for it. People that work pay for it, businesses pay for it, tax dollars pay for it, and so taxes are going to go up. But going back to the law itself, it's illegal to apply this legislation to one group and to not apply it to another group. And yet, it's being done. We've written before about some of the recess appointments that the administration made last year, trying to get people appointed without congressional approval, sidestepping the Senate, in other words, to just carry on with this unilateral process to appoint, favorable people that have been loyal to the administration. Now, that was something, I think it was last summer, that was stopped by a federal court and declared to be something that was patently unconstitutional. That you can't just go forward and try to bypass Congress to get the people in place that you want in there. Now, it's interesting because, the Obama administration, including the president himself, he went to Harvard Law School, and he's surrounded by a lot of really, really smart people. And do you suppose in that group of people there's anyone there that understands that making a recess appointment when Congress is actually, in session is illegal? Of course they understand this. But they're looking for ways to try to get around it, to get around the law or the restrictions that are there because of the rules. More recently, there was a story just the other day about this nuclear waste dump that is supposed to be built in Nevada. It's not a popular site, but it's probably in an obscure location, and you have to get rid of waste. And so it was approved by Congress. The law was passed, But because it doesn't fit in with the agenda of the administration, the White House has stonewalled all the efforts to get licensing to complete the process. This is a project, I guess, that's gone on for years and years and years, and the people up there are just trying to finish it. And Congress recognized that and said, okay, let's finish it. But the agencies working in cooperation with the White House have prevented that from happening. And here again, a federal court has intervened to say that that's illegal. You can't do that. It violates the law. Look at the IRS scandal from this past summer. It's illegal for the White House or for the government to use any kind of agency or arm of the government to persecute political opponents. And yet it happened. It happened for months. It happened for well over a year. That sort of thing was going on. Back in 2011, just to give you one more example, President Obama authorized military action in Libya without first consulting Congress. This was against the law, and yet it was done. It was done. I'm going to quote to you what the President said from his State of the Union address. He said, "I urge this Congress to pursue a bipartisan market-based solution to climate change, but if Congress won't act soon to protect future generations, I will direct my cabinet to come up with executive actions that we can take now and in the future to reduce pollution, prepare our communities for the consequences of climate change, and speed the transition to more sustainable sources of energy." See, in other words, I'll do anything to get around the law. The President's position, as I think most of you, certainly most of you Americans should know, is to execute the law. The laws are passed by Congress. The President is there to execute them. And, I mean, if there's any question or dispute on it, I suppose, then you have the judicial branch to settle it. But what we're seeing more and more is politicians today, not in Congress, but either that have been appointed by the President or in the White House itself, that are there making laws. The same thing's happening. It's not just the White House, it's happening in the Supreme Court and elsewhere too. People who are making laws instead of executing the law. Last September, there was a panel of experts that cited some of these incidents that we flew through here this morning, and told the House Judiciary Committee that as President, Barack Obama has made a habit of bypassing or ignoring constitutional limitations on his power. Then one senator in that hearing, Senator Mike Lee from Utah, he told the panel, "We cannot ignore abuses of power because if we ignore them, they become part of established practice and tradition." There's lots of precedent being set here. It's becoming part of the established practice and tradition now to just circumvent the law, to go around the law, to set it aside, or to apply it just to a certain group and not to another group, or to apply it at a certain time when it's more convenient, but not this year, or not in an election year. This is a quote from the New York Times back in April of last year. "Increasingly, in recent months, the administration has been seeking ways to act without Congress." That's from the New York Times. That's one of the administration's cheerleaders. And yet, even the New York Times is aware of what's happening. Notice this quote from the National Review. This is from August 5th, 2013, just a few weeks ago. It says, "Congress's supine ceding of its powers and the Obama administration's usurpation of both legal and extra-legal powers is worrisome, but what is particularly disturbing is the quiet, polite, workaday manner with which the administration goes about its business and with which the American people accepts it." It just carries right on, quietly, peacefully, one would think, and then the American people just follow right along with it. Let's look at Romans 4. Look at a few scriptures here before we conclude today. That's really scarier than the action itself, is just the fact that so many people in America seem fine with bypassing the Constitution. So many people are okay with just accepting whatever is handed down. Romans 4 and verse 15, it says, because the law works wrath, for where no law is, there is no transgression. It works, well, of course, you just want to explain the verse itself. The law works wrath because it defines sin, and sin's the transgression of the law. And the wages of sin, as Paul said in chapter 6 of Romans, is death. And so that is a wrathful outcome for a sinful lifestyle. But that doesn't mean the law is to be besmirched or to be put down or set aside. It's not like the law is the bad guy. The law is the mirror that shows us what needs to be changed and adjusted and corrected. Now, Paul obviously is talking about God's spiritual law here in Romans, the Ten Commandments. But there's a principle of law here that we can certainly apply even to what's happening nationally right now in America. Because if you look at this fast-growing number of constitutional scholars or politicians or professors who are out there saying that the law is the problem, I mean, where is that going to lead this nation? Where are we headed with that kind of thinking, with that kind of leadership? Leaders trying to get around the law instead of applying it or executing it. There's quite a few leaders in America that believe if you get rid of the law, you'll get rid of the problems. No law, no problem. And it's just the opposite. Paul said if you don't have law, then you don't have anything to define transgression or sin. And if there's no such thing as sin, what is there? It's just every man for himself. Anarchy, in other words. Everyone doing what seems right in his own eyes, just like it says at the end of Judges 21. Look at that. See what happened to Israel when they got into that thinking anciently. What happened to ancient Israel? What happened to Judah anciently? You know that history. You're familiar with that history. Back up to chapter 3, Romans 3 and verse 10. It says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. See, and in verse 23, further down, Paul says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's no righteousness. None are righteous, Paul says, because sin is so widespread. It's rampant. Verse 11, there's none that understands. There's none that seek after God. No one's going after God. Now, the Bible is a book about law, isn't it? And this thinking that you see in politics, it goes beyond politics. It's in religion too. Theologians who just kind of cherry pick the favorite passages of Scripture and apply it or try to, and then the other ones are ignored. The other ones are set aside. The other ones don't apply. That's common in religion today. Now we see it happening on the national scene. And what's it leading to? Verse 12, they are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that does good, no, not one. See, we're in the situation that we're in today in this nation because of sin. We're in a society that's just rife with corruption and division and strife because of sin, because of lawlessness. That's why we see this world as it is today. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet, it says, are swift to shed blood. That's the world that we live in today. And yet many people still will champion democracy, freedom. Not that there's any better alternatives in this world, but as John Adams said, one of America's first presidents, democracy, he said, never lasts long. It never lasts long. He said it soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There was never a democracy that did not commit suicide. Now, Abraham Lincoln said much the same many years after that. That's where we're headed. I mean, chaos is coming. And in some sectors, it's already here. But it's coming, students, because of lawlessness. The next verse there, verse 17 says, the way of peace they have not known. Man is ignorant of the way of life that leads to peace. Instead, we're out there causing destruction. Mr. Armstrong, Herbert W. Armstrong, once said that man has proven unable to control and resist the downward pull of his passions and nature. That nature's talked about here in Romans as well. Look at chapter 8 quickly. You know about this verse, Romans 8 and verse 7. It says, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it's not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. That's the attitude of man. That's the carnal mind of man, an unconverted man without the Spirit of God, of which there are many in this world. That's the natural way of thinking. It's just naturally hostile to God's way of life, which is spelled out in His law. Let's conclude over in Ezra chapter 7. Ezra chapter 7. That's the nature, that hostile nature that God's family will change over all the earth in the world tomorrow. That's the nature that has to be rooted out, that carnality, that hostility toward God, that way that seems right, as the proverb says, that seems right to man, but is actually very hostile to God's law. You're here at God's college. This is a college of law, as you heard at the orientation, which means that you've got to study the Bible and submit to God's rule and let the Bible and the laws of the Bible serve as your guide in life. Use it, in other words. Apply the laws. Execute these laws in your life. Yesterday we started the course, Doctrines of the Philadelphia Church of God. God's doctrines are His laws, His teachings, His instructions. Ezra chapter 7 and verse 10, it says, for Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. See, Ezra was the leader, the spiritual guide, and he didn't see himself as above the law. He sought after it. In fact, he prepared his heart. He was educated in God's law. He set his mind there. You can look in the margin and see what it says there for prepared, or I think it's another translation actually. It means set, like Colossians 3:2. Set your mind on the things above. He prepared his heart. His heart was like King David's, who loved God's law. He loved it. How much love do you see even for the laws of the land in Washington? Not very much. Not very much. You see a lot of carnal reasoning. You see a lot of politics. Politics reigns supreme. The political agenda is the law, really. That's the supreme law. And then the other laws that get passed in Congress, whether Americans have had say or not, you can get around them in a lot of cases. Or they maybe apply to a certain group, but not another. Verse 10 again, Ezra prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it, and to do it. See, what a commitment this man had to law-keeping, to obedience. He sought after the law, and then he prepared to do it. He used it. He implemented it into his own life first, and that's where it begins with you students. You're not president yet. You're not the leaders of the world yet, but you will be once Jesus Christ returns. And so what do you do in the meantime? Prepare your heart to seek the law of God and do it. Have the same commitment, the same dedication, the same loyalty that Ezra did. Here we are just at the outset of another school year, and you should ask going in, is your heart really set on keeping God's law? You're being trained to do so. Your heart has to be in this. It really has to be in it. What would this college or the academy be like if the laws weren't applied or executed? Or what would this campus be like if for this half of the room, the law applied, but for this half of the room it didn't. What kind of school would this be? I don't even want to think about that. It wouldn't be God's school. It wouldn't be God's college. My father wrote in the booklet he put together on Ezra and Nehemiah, saying, we should all set personal goals to be more like Ezra. We all must continually set our minds to grasp law, God's law and government. He says this does require much study and a lot of hard work. We must know the law so that we can teach statutes and judgments. See, is it even law if it doesn't apply to everyone? That's what's happening in the United States. It's not law in the end, it's just anarchy. Now, God's college, on the other hand, is built on law. And as we head into this next school year, approach your education like the future world leaders that you are, the teachers that you are, the teachers of tomorrow, and the teachers, students, that this world, that this nation desperately, desperately needs. Strive with all of your heart to obey and to even teach God's law. And then while you're at it, make sure you pray earnestly. You look at this world today, boy, pray earnestly for God's kingdom to come so that you can help then, to solve the problems that man's lawless nature is bringing to this earth.